The Grenfell inquiry published its report this week, and it was highly critical of Eric Lord Pickles. He'd been the Tory Community Secretary between 2013 and 15. Now, Pickles argued that the then Tory government's deregulation policy, they were trying to deregulate everything in those days, it was never intended to include fire safety. And he said that he was genuinely amazed that civil servants weren't aware of this fact. The inquiry chair, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, he replied that he was unable to accept Lord Pickles' evidence on that particular question, as there were no documentation nor witnesses to support Pickles' assertion. There then occurred a very telling exchange between Pickles and the inquiry, which spoke more than 1,000 words.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lord Pickles.
He later apologised for this. An impatient former government secretary said he had little time for the Grenfell inquiry as he had plans for lunch.
Could I respectfully remind you that you did promise that we would be away this morning, and I have changed my schedules to fit this in. I do have an extremely busy day meeting people, but this is more important than anything. But I would urge you to use your time wisely.
Eric Pickles was Secretary of State responsible for fire safety before Grenfell. But today his lordship seemed to have more pressing engagements than explain himself to the inquiry.
Could I just ask one point? I am at your disposal. I will be here as long as you are. But I've got a number of international guests coming in to see me. If you think I'm going to go into the afternoon session, I would like to do this to start cancelling.
God forbid that Lord Pickles misses lunch or his meetings with important dignitaries. After all, the inquiry is only dealing with the preventable deaths of 72 men, women and children. Many would, however, point out that the arrogant and ignorant Lord Pickles could do well to miss a few lunches. Another example of Tory indifference to the suffering of the Grenfell victims happened a matter of days. Remember this, a matter of days after the disaster, when Jacob Rees-Mogg was being interviewed and said this about the advice given to residents by the fire service to stay in their flats on that night.
And it seems to me that is the tragedy of it, that the more one's read over the weekend about the report and about the chances of people surviving, if you just ignore what you're told and leave, you are so much safer. And I think if either of us were in a fire, whatever the fire brigade said, we would leave the burning building. It just seems the common sense thing to do, and it is such a tragedy that didn't happen.
Jacob Rees would have done well to have waited until the full details were known, as over 40% of those who lost their lives on the night were disabled and would have found it impossible to escape. There is, of course, an Irish link to Grenfell in the shape of the firm Kingspan, which supplied Cooktherm K15 insulation board, which was used on about 5% of the plastic foam insulation layer of external cladding on the block. Now, the inquiry uncovered emails from Kingspan UK staff way back in 2009, where they joked that the fire safety tests on the K15 product that they were providing were flawed. Admittedly, while not the main cause of the inferno, Kingspan knew their product wasn't safe. They acknowledged this fact in a response to the findings of the inquiry this week, admitting that their company had long acknowledged the wholly unacceptable historical failings that occurred in part of our UK insulation business. The question then must be, why has Ulster Rugby continued their association with the company up until 2025? It will remain a stain on Ulster Rugby that it put money ahead of principle by continuing that connection, knowing it was believed that Kingspan had been partly culpable for the deaths of 72 people. Indeed, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming before finally agreeing to cut their connection with the company in 2025. A decision that the Grenfell Fire Relatives Association called not a moral decision, but a calculated strategic move centred around, would you believe, money.